Good afternoon. At this time, I'd like to call the Justice Center Jail Project Committee to order. If there's any visitors wishing to address this committee about agenda items only, you're welcome to do so at this time with an allotment of 5 minutes.
Noe 2343 Joe Stevens Road. On the website, I saw the letter from Mosley saying that Blaine is the apparent low bidder. And they are, if you don't finish your third floor. If we're simply going to have level 0, 1, and 2 for detention and a shell for the third floor. And that $83 million conveniently ignores the $4 million that's already been spent. However much is still due to Mosley and to Burwell on their contracts. The Integrity Commissioning Services contract, the Hale House improvements that have been bid, but I don't believe you've seen them, or you may have seen them, but they haven't been brought to you for action. The Hale House paving, the materials testing contract that you talked about on Monday, the costs for Helen Ross McNabb to improve their property, unless that happens to be already in the bids. Other items, furniture, fixtures, equipment. And the big one that nobody likes to talk about, future staffing. We like to just pretend that's, I know you've heard you all talk about, oh, this has been kicked down the road. Well, staffing has certainly been kicked down the road big time. Maybe you won't need what Jim Hart said, but what do you expect to need? Or does it all depend? And when is anybody going to decide what it depends on as far as if you do level 0, 1, and 2? What will be the staffing requirements? When do you expect to do level 3? I hope this isn't a sideways thing to put Blaine in, and then before this contract is over, you put level 3 as a change order. I sincerely hope that is not the idea, because if that's the idea, you should award it, if you were going to award it, and I'm not for awarding it, but you would take the low bidder now with the alternates. So like I said, I'm not for that at all. Let's back up. Take a new perspective. Get rid of this tunnel vision that, by golly, we're going to build this whether we need it or not, no matter what it costs, no matter what it does to the taxpayers, to the citizens. You have never, now you can tell me you went to visit these places, yeah, but you have never looked and made a comparison, a factual, independent comparison of the costs between doing pods like Coffee County. I'm not saying do Coffee County, but a similar design. You've never looked at the staffing differences between the two, and you've never looked at any differences in safety. And there is not one person, I defy anybody to tell me that a multi-story jail is safer or even equally as safe as a one level. So why are we letting pride and politics and power drive this? Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to address?
Kim Coffey, 8220 East AJ Highway, Whitesburg. I work in the jail. And yes, you all have seen me plenty of times. But is our safety, I mean, do y'all even think about it? I mean, because all we've got is a can of pepper spray. That's it. Yes, we have been trained to help, to take care of business if we have to, which we rather not, but if we have to. But our safety is what worries me. Not only our safety, but the safety of the inmates. That regardless of what anybody has done, we've got to protect them from others. And a multi-tier jail, in some of the news stories that I've read here lately, you have officers thrown off of them. You have inmates thrown off of them. And if you're not even going to fix the third floor, if the third floor is fixed and it's open dorm, how y'all helping us at all? It's better one floor, 2-man cells. That'll make everybody's life easier and a whole lot more safer. So think about the officers who don't come in, who they either work an extra job or whatever, or they're at work now. Think about them. Their families would like them to come home in one piece. Okay? Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to address?
Gwen Holden, 8150 West Point Drive. What about the taxpayers? They're going to have to pay for this. So are you all. And you know what? I don't think they're happy paying that much money for a jail. I'm not. I know I'm not going to be around much longer probably, but I'll be paying on it some, I'd say. But my kids, my grandkids are going to be paying on that jail. They live here. They live in Hamlin County. We've lived here all of our life. I just think it's too much money. And I don't just think it, but other taxpayers do too. They may not come here and tell you about it, but I'm speaking up for them because they don't want to come here and tell you about it. Because you know why they don't want to come here and tell you about it? I felt like myself giving up lots of times on things, but I don't give up. I don't quit. I'm a fighter. And when it comes to me, all the years that I have worked, I started working when I was 15. I'm still working. I don't like laziness. Neither does God. And he don't like it when you build something for people that break the law and innocent people have to pay for it. Come on. These people break the law. They know that they shouldn't do that. I don't like keeping them up. I don't.
Anyone else wishing to address?
Karen Arwood, 1501 Eller Road. I just wanted to add, not only when you get the lowest bid that's higher than what was initially said and everything, but other costs to consider down the road. When you're increasing the number of inmates, then this is increase of cost. You're going to have an increase in costs and utilities, your electric, your water. As Kim said, the staffing, inmate care. I think it was just a little over a year ago that the medical expenses, I think it was January of 2020, was just short of $100,000 for 1 month. The more people you keep, and I know we need another jail and you need more room and everything, but when you add all this additional cost that maybe you haven't taken in consideration, the health care, that's one of the medical costs, the food costs, inmate clothing, there's all kinds of just more and more cost. At what point is this going to be astronomical on top of paying for how many years on the jail? Just want to think about the whole scope of everything. Plus, I'm sure there's insurance, building insurance, all this to take into consideration on this huge building. Like I said, the utilities, the medical expenses. We got a whole lot we've got to consider on top of this huge monstrosity, very, very expensive jail. Keep all that in mind when you make a decision as to what we're going to do. It's on beyond just the cost of the building. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Bonnie Bullington, 317 Stubblefield Street, Whitesburg. You know, better than a year ago, when I started coming to these meetings and the jail was first being discussed, it was going to be a $75 million jail and hopefully come in under that. And now all of a sudden we're up to 83 million with an incomplete jail. A million questions still to be asked. It seems like every meeting we find out something new that we didn't know. And this whole thing just seems to be, from the very get-go, not well put together. We asked for a referendum to let the people vote on whether they wanted this big monstrosity or they wanted a regular jail. Y'all didn't want that. You knew better than the people. And you still seem like you know better than the people. And I realize you're all, I'm assuming, an educated bunch of people. I'm not. I'm just a simple country girl. But I can see the pitfalls of this. I can see the dangers that this is bringing to our county. One of the commissioners made the remark in an interview. As a matter of fact, I think it was my commissioner that wanted to build a jail that would last 40 years. Do you honestly think this incomplete fiasco of a jail is going to last 30 or 40 years? There's no way. No way it can. So now we're looking at a half-done jail, and we're still way over budget. And I just tell you, when this is built and the bills are totaled, it'll be way over 100 million. And I don't see that for our county. I don't see that our county can stand it. And I really wish y'all would take a step back and reevaluate this. This is just, it's going to kill our county. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Emily Reitnauer, 1200 West 6 North Street. I have 3 things to say. I want to say I'm on your side. I don't assume any of y'all have malicious intent. I believe you're doing the best you can and making the best decisions that you can. I believe that you want what's best for our county, as do I, as do all of us here. So let's start there. The second thing I want to point out is now is not a great time to build things. If you're connected to the building industry at all, you know that the prices of building materials have doubled, tripled, and quadrupled. And Home Depot is right now in our town rationing electrical wire. This building, it's surprising the bids were as low as they were, and most likely the cost will be far greater than estimated. And the last thing I want to say about taking a bid is you never want to take the lowest bid if you want a good building, or the highest one either, but that's another subject. We have to get back to the problem we're trying to solve. And what is that? The problem we're trying to solve is getting people out of the dungeon that is our current jail, right? That's the problem. There are a lot of possible solutions, and we need to be open to all of them. Charles Marone, a civil engineer and the author of this book, which I will buy for any of you who wants to read it, argues that the conventional wisdom of building big so you don't have to build again, go big or go home, so it will last 40, 50, 60 years, is misguided. And it ends up costing communities more in the long run. And the main reason for that is because, well, number one, maintenance costs are never factored in. And number two, nobody can predict the future and really know what we need in 50 years. I, for one, think it's very pessimistic to expect that we will need such a big jail in 50 years. I hope that our society improves to the point where we will need a smaller jail, not a bigger one, in 50 years. Charles Marone argues in this book that instead, layered on top of an aggressive, this is a quote, maintenance strategy, cities need to make many small investments throughout a neighborhood, all aimed at improving the quality of life. This involves a simple four-step approach. Humbly observe where people in the neighborhood struggle. 2, identify the next smallest thing that can be done today to address the struggle. 3, do that thing, do it right away. And 4, repeat the process. He argues that we should take small bets in our city planning instead of go big or go home bets because they're far less risky, more easy to correct, and we can gather valuable feedback along the way. It's the small trial and error approach. So coming back to the problem that we have to solve, getting people out of our dungeon. One simple thing that we can do today is to simply stop arresting so many people. We can cite and release the people who have not committed a violent crime, as happens at a traffic stop, instead of taking them to jail. I know from people who know that our law enforcement is still arresting too many people. You all should use your influence to pressure law enforcement to stop arresting so many people. And that will help solve, that's one step, that's not the only step that needs to be taken, but it's one small, immediate, and free step that can be taken. This jail isn't going to be completed for years. It's not going to get anybody out of our dungeon today. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Brandon Burrows, 794 Seymour Street. With a lot of what's been said here today, I'm going to echo things that you've probably said before, and I've not said a whole lot about the jail going forward, but the main thing that I think of when I look at this budget is the factor of the people that are not budgeted into this equation. And I look at the law enforcement that we have in Hamlin County, and these guys go out every single day, and I'm sure every single one of you would agree. They go out every day, and they do a job that not a lot of people want to do with an uncertainty of what they're going to face on that job during that day. And I, for one, appreciate the job that they do. I appreciate the work that they put in, the time they put in. It should be the sole goal of this council, this committee, to have every single one of them safe in every aspect of the day that they face. Every one of them should have your 100% support that they go home safe to their families at night, including the people that work in our jail. We've selected to build a building that we have been told by our current sheriff that is not safe. You've selected to build a structure that other counties have said we've looked and we've weighed the options and it is not safe. And yet this commission has chosen to go ahead and proceed with that building. I feel like that we need to stop and we need to think about the cost and the human impact of the men and the women that have to work in that facility every day. We've not taken that into account. I've never once seen an allotment in the budget that says we're going to cover this safety equipment, we're going to give them this type of PPE, we're going to give them this type of support, this type of medical staffing support. We are not figuring this in account for the officers that are working in that facility. What you are doing is you're figuring an account for a building that's a monument to this commission. It's nothing more than a monument to this commission. When you hang, God forbid the day would come that one of those employees in that jail would be injured or, God forbid, killed while they were on the job in an incident. It's my prayer, it's my hope that the plaque that you all hang in the building that has your names, I've seen so many buildings that the different county commissions, city councils have built, that have plaques that they hang in the building that says who all was on the commission when it was built, who was the chairman, who was this, who was that. God forbid, I hope that one day that plaque is enough to suffice to wash the blood off your hands if something was to happen. I'm telling you, I'm not saying this is a doomsday prophecy for something to happen. I don't want anything to happen. But if it came to that, is that enough to have this monument to this commission? Is that enough to suffice for the cost of an injury or great harm or loss of life to one of our people that we have working in this jail? I want you to really think about that. I want you to take that into consideration. I don't think it is. I don't think anybody would agree or say it is. It's not worth it. It's not worth the safety risk that we put to the prisoners. And they're prisoners. Yeah, they've done things that they shouldn't have done. They've been locked up for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, it is not worth putting a risk onto one of the prisoners that we have in our custody. When they're in the custody of the county, when they're in the custody of our jail, they are our responsibility. And it's our responsibility to be a good steward toward them. The other thing that I'll say is that we have a sheriff that is outgoing, that's going to be an outgoing sheriff here very soon. We're going to have a new sheriff that's going to step in and take that role. Even though that these sheriffs, the gentlemen that are running for sheriff have displayed that they have a background in law enforcement and that they understand law enforcement, we're putting a sheriff in that ultimately has no experience being sheriff. They have no experience of what it means to be the sheriff and to fulfill that role. So you're going to turn over a brand new multi-million-dollar jail, $100 million jail, $83 million jail, whatever that you decide you're going to build, you're going to turn it over to a man that has not been in that position, has not been in that position as sheriff, and is in there as a newly elected sheriff, and you're going to turn that over to him. You're setting that man up for failure, and that is a disjustice to him. I ask this commission to consider these things. Pump the brakes. You're not too far along in this that you can't stop. You can't pump the brakes. Think about our officers. Think about the employees of the jail, and make it about more than just building a monument to this commission.
Anyone else? If not, we'll move along. Item 3A, old business, there is none. Item 4A, Justice Center bid, Brian Payne with Mosley Architects.
Do we have the PowerPoint?
The option moving, that's last.
Oh, they've got copies of it. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know you had copies of it. I apologize for that.
Would you like a copy?
No, I'm good. I think I've seen it. So, thank you. My apologies. I misunderstood the communication. So we're going to go over the bid tabulation that you all have copies of. I'm sure you've seen it. We got 4 bids one from each of the pre-qualified general contractors that we all had agreed to shortlist on the project. In looking at the bids, we feel like all the bid numbers were actually pretty tight, pretty close to one another. If you look at the total base bid price, which includes the allowance, it's the second line of numbers there, it appears that Blaine Construction Corporation is the apparent low bidder. Now, if you look at the total project, which includes all of the alternates, the total base bid plus the alternates, that shifts to Branch Building Incorporated, which is the one that's highlighted there on your bid tabulation that you see. So, it depends on what, if anything, you would be interested in awarding, whether you would award the base bid without alternates or the base bid with some of the alternates. But I think if you look at the tab, you'll see, especially in the alternates, that every one of the general contractors, with the exception of one of the line items, were very close to one another. I think that our biggest summary our biggest takeaway from looking at this is that this is a reflection of the current market conditions. This is what the design is worth in the current construction industry today. That's our big takeaway from that. I don't know that I have anything else specifically to say about the tab, but if there's something in particular about the bid tabulation that I can answer, I'll do that. I'll be back a little bit later to talk more about some optional paths forward that we can all discuss together. If there's anything specific about the tab that I can answer, maybe something that is not legible or not understood, I could certainly help clarify that. Okay.
Any questions?
Mr. Payne, do we have any idea what type of padding they have in these bids?
Padding they have as far as,
Yeah, I mean, we all are very disappointed,
yes.
very disappointed. We led to believe we were going to come back in the 60s. Maybe not led, but, it was suggested.
Yep.
And for them to come back this, yeah, I was heartbroken.
Yeah.
Okay, so, are they, because of the current market, have they inflated their bids to a point that, is there a lot of room?
Well, I'll tell you.
Is there any negotiation going on with these guys to is this their bottom numbers?
So, Commissioner Kershaw, we have been in contact with all of the bidders. We have not gotten a breakdown of any of their bids any further than what we have here, so I can't really speak to if there's specific line items that are padded, because I just don't know yet. But I know the numbers are disappointed. We're disappointed in the numbers as well. But, I can't say anything more about the padding, if any, exists in the number.
Is there anything current design, without changing the scope of the project, that we can look at?
There are some VE options, but I think because the numbers are so much higher than where we wanted the budget to come in, and we'll go over some of this later on, we feel like the best option to get that much money out of the project is to cut scope, cut square footage out of the building. Any other approach, you might be kind of nickel and diming, kind of throwing change at it where you're trying to save dollars, if that makes sense, if that analogy makes sense. So we feel like that's the best strategy at this point. Hope that answers.
Thank you.
This, of course, would be your professional opinion, but you're in this business, and you're quite well aware of the current market. Do you think that these prices might go down in the near future, or are we in for a long run?
Commissioner Shipley, that's very hard to predict. It's kind of like predicting the stock market, if you will. It's kind of, throwing darts at it. You don't really know what's going to happen. It's proven this year that construction costs and material costs are continuing to climb. I think the best predictions that we've heard and we've seen is that trend is going to continue. We don't know that to be true, but what the forecasts are predicting is that's kind of what they're predicting. It'd be very hard to try to find a dip in the upcoming time coming forward and say, well, that's when we want to try to target. It's just hard. You're never going to be able to know and predict that. So, hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you.
Hey, Brian, just real quick, do any of these bids have the contingencies listed separately? Because I know from building projects that's been done, facility I work at, that most all have contingencies in there. Do these have those listed with those, or this just their base, and we're gonna be left basically paying the bill on contingencies on top of this?
The contingencies for the general contractor should be in their number. Now, we have recommended the owner hold a contingency, the county
Yeah.
as owner contingency hold it. But in the general contractors, this is the bottom line for them. There's no contingencies in addition to this. That answers your question.
It does.
That's the bottom line today.
Sir?
That's the bottom line of that business today.
That's, yes, sir, that's their bid today, and they're having to hold that for 60 days is what we wrote into.
Price and material goes up, or they go right along and go up with it.
No, they have been tasked with holding this bid, this number, for a minimum of 60 days while this commission makes some decisions.
Days, I hadn't heard that.
Yes, sir.
I
That
think
was-
Mr.
that was
Neesmith's
one-
asking if they get the bid and the project starts and they start building and the cost of materials continues to go up.
That's on them. That's on them. They
That's
have
on
to
them.
hold
There
it.
is no
Correct.
contingencies.
They have to hold this number. Yes, sir.
Just for the 60 days, not.
Well, 60 days is to get to contract. So once they're under contract, they are locked into that dollar amount. Maybe that clarifies it a little bit better for you.
They're locked into,
Once they're under contract, yes, sir.
no cost, no change orders coming through.
Well, they'll try for change orders. It's normal. It's the normal construction world. They'll always try for change orders. But you know, we'll try to limit that or mitigate it.
Any other questions?
You know, it's gone up 20, let's say around, I'll say $20 million. I know you get a percentage of all that. Is there any leeway in your percentage?
That's not for me to answer. I'll have to defer that to my principal. I'm sorry.
Anyone else? If not, we'll move forward. Item 4B, project finances. Mayor Britton.
I'm going to ask Tony, our project manager, just make some comments about the bid received from his perspective. And then
Okay. Thank you, Tony.
Like to say, good to see you all sitting together. Hopefully that's a sign of time. The question about contingencies in the bid, we had 4 bidders, very competitive. They worked on this thing from issuance of the documents to bid were last of January. And they all worked. And each contractor probably spent, and this is just purely a guess, about $40,000 is probably what it costs to bid this project for each contractor. So they're not trying to hedge their bets. I've talked to each contractor, trying to explain ways of finding some money. Probably knowing we're not going to award this, I don't know what your wishes will be, but there is some value engineering there. There is no contingency, but there's some value engineering, but not $20 million worth of value engineering. It's just not there. So there is some unit pricing in here and in these allowances when it bumps up that $4.4 million, and that's got the micropiles we talk about. Because they don't know, we give them a length of 65 feet deep, which that's from soils explorations, and the engineers just determined that that's a good depth to figure, and then they took each of those different micropiles. I think there's 4 of them. 4. And then they took them, got a unit price, and multiplied that out, and that came to about $4.1 million, you know, in there. And if it'll adjust up or down. Personally, I'm an optimist. I think it'll go down, but still, it's still going to be $3.5 million. There's other contingencies in there. We put in some money and said, just because of fairness, we get an add deduct price if we say, okay, you got to figure 1,500 cubic yards of unsuitable soils in your foundations, or that number may be 500. But anyway, there's a unit price there that will go up and down, but it's in this bid right now. So that's the case. I've talked to all 4 contractors, some of them more than most, trying to get some ideas for reduction of scope. So anything else I need to cover from your point? Any questions? We're all disappointed.
I don't know whether this is a good question or not, but it's something that's on some of our minds. I know it's your job to keep an eye on the project, but you don't think, with the price increasing, possibility of prices increase, that these contractors might fudge a little bit on the amount of concrete that goes in a foundation or things like that?
You have pre-qualified 4 very good, very fine, reputable contractors. You did that in the pre-qual process. You also have inspections by, we were going to talk about eventually recommending a geo services contractor that does inspections and stuff. We all keep an eye on it. Your inspectors keep an eye. The fire marshal keeps an eye on it. So, no, they wouldn't do that. It's just not worth it.
Tony, do you see annually construction costs going up 4 to 7%? Now, if we
Typically over my career, and it's getting longer and longer.
if we prolong this, we're looking at obviously more.
The inflation that's happened since the first of the year is unprecedented. I've never seen it like that way. Usually you see 3.5%, 4%. In 2007, 2008, it's flat for a couple of years. Everybody remembers that. But typically, it started rolling pretty good in 1996, and every year after that, it's been hammered at 3%. And there will be people at the first year that'll try to bump steel or concrete, and they'll try to bump that 5%. But usually by 1st of March, everybody's settled back down and it gets more competitive. This is not the case right now. This is, like I said, unprecedented inflation.
The reason I asked that question, I've been keeping up with Cott County, and they're getting ready to build a jail also. In the few months that they started talking about it and the money they've come up with, every time I picked up the Tribune and read the article about that jail, it's went up every time. Yeah. And talking to the mayor there the other day, she says, they're not as well equipped with the finances as Hamilton County is. Hamilton County is in a good shape to do this. It just bothers me to know if we stall it more, we're really hurting ourselves. And I just, in your opinion, do you really see some of this stuff start leveling off? I mean, I know what this gentleman said, but how do you see it?
I've never seen anything like this, and it's kind of like, I watch my 401k and it's doing pretty good, and I've watched it be flat for years and years and years, and then jump up, and I can't tell you. I mean, I have a feel that it'll slow down because people can't afford to build, and
right.
Electrical wire from the Home Depot will become available again. So.
Anyone else?
Tony, thank you for emailing me the allowance.
You get them? Okay.
Now I know what allowances are.
Yeah. Okay. You're welcome. Yep.
Mayor Britton.
Bill, could I ask Mosley another question?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have any big projects on the drawing board that's going to be delayed right now because of the inflated prices?
Oh, that question's us?
Yeah.
So far, no. We're actually bidding another pure courthouse project near Pinehurst, North Carolina, probably next week. I'll share those numbers with Bill to see if we're seeing the same thing. But we're seeing this across the board. Like I say, I really wish we would take the numbers this time last year, which were phenomenally low. And we reported that to you, that we would hope that would continue, but it's certainly rebounded back. If you remember, prior to COVID, we were in an escalating construction market that was faster than normal as well. And my guess is as good as anybody else's, but I think after COVID hit and it impacted the market, all the costs went way down. They shot back up, and they springboarded past where they were in 2019. And that might just be a natural progression of what it would have done without the COVID pandemic. That's just anybody's guess, but there is a lot of construction activity. Everybody's familiar with what's happening with lumber prices. We're a non-combustible building, so lumber's really not a big factor with us. It's really steel, and that's steel all the way across the board, from bar joist to miscellaneous steel to angle iron to rebar. I mean, everything in there has gone up. We've been hearing now CMU concrete is up. And so we just, we're seeing it, and all I can say is, in terms of being able to prognosticate, will the price go down if we just hold and then rebid later on in the year? The risk is that, and it's a risk that you would take. It may be 3% higher than it was today. And that's the concern we have. And so we're trying to say where we are right now, the available funds that the county has, what can we do to mitigate that? And Ryan's going to share some options with you that will allow us to get it back within the numbers or close to the numbers, and then still allows the county to phase in future growth over time. So we'll share some of those ideas with you to see how you like to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Dan just pretty much gave a segue into the next part of the meeting and the information that we wanted to present to you guys. What we've done is since the bid opening is we've met 2 or 3 times and just discussed, what the options are, what the priorities are, what feedback I've gotten from you on what you think the priorities are, and then kind of brainstormed on some ideas, and that's what Brian will be sharing with you in just a few minutes. What I want to do is go over where we are financially as far as the project goes. So far, starting in 2015 with the first piece of property that we purchased on West 3rd North Street, we spent about $3.9 million on what can be called construction phase expenses, such as property acquisitions, design fees, soil testing, surveys, demolition, those kind of things. And it does not include, this number, this $3.9 million number does not include Phase 1 and Phase 2 of our contract with Mosley, which Phase 1 was the study that was done on what do we need, and then Phase 2 was the site site evaluations. And so that $3.9 million number does not include that. That equaled about $185,000. So we've spent to date about $4.1 million is what we've spent to date. All right, of the 3.9, this is the areas where we've spent the money. Well, let me back up, sorry. All right, where the money came from, okay, where the money came from that we spent to this point is early on, before we issued the bonds, we paid for some property and we paid for some other services from the general fund, and that's the $417,000. That came from the general fund, and then we spent about $3.5 million from the bond proceeds so far. So that's where the money has come from that has been spent to this point. What it's been spent on are design and development. It's about $1.5 million. The project management, $230,000. Property acquisition at $1.9 million, and then the testing, the demolition, the other expenses that we've had have account for about $282,000 of that. So where are we on the bond proceeds? In the initial bond resolution that you passed authorized the issuance of $85 million, up to $85 million, and 10.4 of it went to West High School and the renovation of West High School. And then the balance, 74.6 million, was available, or is available for the Justice Center project if you choose to spend that. All right, so where we are on the 7.6 million is in the budget. You have in your documents a budget for the project. It looks something like this. This is the budget document. And that has the detail of the numbers that I'm giving you. And so of the 7.4 or 74.6 million dollars, okay, in the budget, these are commitments that we've made as far as contractual agreements, and those that we anticipate. We haven't spent all this money, of course, but we are committed for about 5.2 million in professional services, and you'll see a lot of the detail in that budget document. And then under acquisitions, permits, and FF&E, which is furniture, fixtures, and equipment, the budget for that is around 3.3 million, which for construction and what I call bricks and mortar, for bricks and mortar, we have about $66 million. So we have about $66 million today available for construction costs, with the low bid in the $80 million range. So we also have, and so just kind of keep that number in mind as we go, as Brian goes through the options that he has.
Is that with, that is without a tax increase?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's with the current bond issue, in which we already have the revenue in place to service that bond issue. And remember, this is for bricks and mortar costs. This is for building costs. Okay, there are other sources of revenue that might be available, and I kind of put an asterisk around 2 or 3 of these, and because of some unknowns. But here's some possible funding sources. One is the local government grant that we received the fiscal year we're in today, which was right at I think it was $1.2 million. That there were no restrictions on the funds. The state of Tennessee and Governor Lee gave it to each county. This year in the governor's budget, there's for Hamlin counties, there's $999,000 in the budget. There's still some questions on whether it will be in the budget when it's passed in a few weeks. We had a statewide mayor's call today and discussed that. So that is a possibility. But put an asterisk by it, because there's still some questions about whether that funding will be available. We should know in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whether that money would be available and if any restrictions would be on it. One item in discussion today in our statewide call, was that we're asking the legislature, the only restriction on that money would be that it would be used for non-reoccurring expenses, which is a construction project is one of those. The American Rescue Plan, which is the federal plan, the $1.9 trillion for counties across the country, an unprecedented amount of money is being allocated to counties. National Association of Counties has estimated that Hamlin County will receive $12.59 million in federal money. Now, it would be paid in 2 installments. One would be in the next 60 days, which would be 50%, and another 50% would be in a year. And it has to be spent by the end of 2024. Now, what we can spend that money on, we're not sure. The federal government and the U.S. Treasury has not given us clear instructions on what the money can be used for. There's some large groupings, but nothing specific, like a Justice Center project, or I know one county in Tennessee is looking to build a health department, and that's what they would use it for, and things like that. So we know we're going to get the money. We don't know what we can spend it on. So that's that's the big question, and again, an asterisk on this revenue source as well. Now, I mentioned in here general fund reserve of $500,000 to $750,000. You may recall the budget amendment you passed, I think it was last month, involving the COVID money. And $700,000 went to fund balance. And so that was federal money that came to Hamilton County that went into reserves. And so we have some of that money available that we could use for a project. And then lastly, in talking to Cumberland Securities this week about our debt capacity, we have the ability that we could issue or authorize and issue $5 million more in debt without any additional revenue, meaning without any kind of a tax increase needed. So that is an option, that we could borrow $5 million more. There not be any. We have the $7.2 million that goes into debt service now. We'll take care of that with interest rates right now. When we issued back in 2020? January of 2020, I think our rate was like in the 2.35 area. Rates now are between 2 and 2.10. So we do have some debt capacity available for $5 million if you choose to go that direction. So I guess the bottom line on all this is that in the budget, in the project budget, we have $66 million available for bricks and mortar right now. We have that money authorized as to be paid through debt service, and to borrow that money and pay it off through debt service. And then these other sources of revenue or other monies that we can tap into depending on what direction you want to go. Now, while I'm here, I want to go ahead and say that I recommend that we reject the bids that we've received, and we look at reducing the scope of the project, and that's what Brian's going to talk about. And then once we determine what we want to build as far as number of beds and so forth, is then determine how to pay for it. So, and that's what these options are. So, thank you. Or any questions?
Any questions?
Anything? Yeah.
Yes, Bill, I do have one. You made a good point there, or maybe it's a good point about the $5 million without any more increase, and it's a lower interest rate. Is it wise for the county to look at that while we can, just to have it in reserve? I'm asking.
I think it's a valid option.
Because of the low interest rate, whether we use it to this project or another project, or does it have to be specified?
It doesn't have to be. Well, in the bond issue, this is the process. This will be the process. Is for the $85 million, you had the initial bond resolution that set the ceiling. Okay, and then you did another bond resolution that authorized the issuance of the first $20 million. Okay, and we issued those. Now, the process now would be we would have to pass another initial bond resolution authorizing that $5,000, and then another resolution to actually issue the bonds.
You're talking about $5 million.
$5 million, right?
What did I say?
You said 5,000.
Okay, 5
Yeah,
million.
it's just for consideration. Is it a wise move to do that, because it costs the county no more as far as
There's no additional tax money needed to service that debt. We've the money that's going into debt service now will take care of it.
I throw that out?
Is there a possibility that that rate might even be below 2%? 'Cause Hawkins County, they come in a few points below 2%
I mean,
when they refinance their debt?
there's the possibility, sure.
Okay.
And generally, when I talk to Cumberland Securities, they're pretty conservative with me in estimating
okay.
what the rates are going to be.
Anyone else?
Mayor, you said we would know on the American Rescue Plan in 60 days.
We should, well, let me say this, Thomas, we'll know this summer for sure.
So with the 66 million that we have now for construction costs and the money that we could possibly look at to get, if it works out, we're 84 million.
I have,
Wow.
Commissioner, I hadn't added it up, to be honest with you. I've just kind of looked at options. Here's some options, because we have other needs as well like I mentioned to you at committees on Monday about the communication system needs that we'll need, and we'll need some money to do that. And initially, I'd looked at the local government grant money or the rescue plan money, using some of that to meet our communication needs. Yes, sir.
I visualize this castle on the hill with bars in it, okay? Who's gonna be the gatekeeper up there? Where we gonna find the people to run this blooming thing? How many people is it gonna take to run this jail? And where we gonna find them?
Well, as far as the number of employees, I think it's going to, we've had the study done, if it was fully developed to the scope, and it's a good design. I support the design. It's a good design. It's a safe design. It's safe for everybody involved. And jail administration was involved from day one in the planning of this. As far as, depending on how we reduce the scope, that would reduce the number of employees needed. But it just depends on what we decide. And I won't deny that it's difficult to hire corrections officers, but it's not the only sector in town that's having a hard time finding people. So it's not just corrections officers that are hard to find.
Still plan on taking the Justice Center and Teresa's office and everything is still all going to?
You're getting ahead of me. All right, wait until you hear the options, okay, and then you'll know more what we've been talking about.
Mayor, one more quick question. Has Dr. Perry, I know during his times that he's come to us wanting money, since I've been sitting on the commission, he keeps telling of additional building projects. Do you have any idea what we may be looking at from him on funding request for the near future? Because
they want to, their number one facility issue is Lincoln, and they're looking at either a new elementary or a new middle school for Lincoln.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mayor. Item 4C, are options moving forward. Brian?
Guess do y'all have copies of all the presentations?
Yes.
Okay, good, okay. So, flipping over to about page 5, path forward. As the mayor indicated, we've had a number of conversations since receiving the bids, and we've tried to rack our brains about what can we do, what can we remove from the project to move forward and reduce the cost of the project. As I mentioned before, we feel like the best strategy is reducing scope, reducing square footage. That way you get more dollars out of the project. So we outlined several options here in what I'm calling path forward, and we'll go over each one of those together. Option 1 calling option one. We did hear from our conversations, the priorities is to maximize beds, maximize jail beds. So that's the overarching priority that we've looked at in these options. Option one is eliminating the courts from the project. What I've highlighted in yellow is the courts on both the first floor and then the court holding and access on the lower level there. Of course, these areas could be added in the future as a future addition to the building. What's highlighted in yellow is roughly 31,200 square feet, and taking an educated guess based upon these bids for ballparking the dollar amount there, we estimate the approximate savings there at $10.9 million from removing this scope from the project. Make sense? Okay. Moving on, option two would be partially shelling the third floor. The areas I've got in white there is one option of shelling 3 of the housing units only and upfitting 3 of the others on this floor level. The idea is that this gains you 1 dormitory that's 40 beds, and then 2 of the sailed housing units on that floor, each being 39 beds. So based upon the low bids alternates that they listed on their bid form, that approximate savings is $1.7 million. This option reduces the overall bed count by 78 beds. We're starting out, overall build out of the project is 621 beds. So taking this option reduces that overall bed count by 78, which leaves you a revised total of 543 beds, if that makes sense. So I'm making sure I walk you through the numbers there so you understand what we're doing. Of course, you are building the third floor, you're just shelling those spaces and you're not building the beds in those shelled spaces. So those housing pods could be upfitted in the future to add beds back if that's something you chose to do in the future. Make sense? Okay. Option 3. We looked at reducing the number of outdoor rec spaces and only going with a single outdoor rec space that is shared for the entire facility. Eliminating that square footage from the project is approximately $2.5 million. This, I do want to caution because this does have an operational effect. Because the way, if you'll recall, we've had a number of conversations about the design over the course of the project here. The way these housing pods are designed, each housing pod has its own rec space, so therefore inmate movement to the rec yard is contained within the housing unit. Taking this option eliminates that self-contained rec yard, and then inmates are having to move throughout the facility to the rec. They're being taken, escorted to the rec yard at a different location than their housing pod. So I think you understand the operational impact of what this option does to you. There is a savings, but it comes at a cost from operational efficiency, if that makes sense.
Could I ask a question?
Certainly, Commissioner.
I thought also the way these rec areas were located, it allowed outdoor light to come into the facility. Will that change that?
The window wall would move towards the inside. So instead of being on the outside of the building at the rec yard, if we eliminate the rec yard, that window wall has to move to the outside wall.
Okay.
So you still have to have that daylight by requirement.
Okay.
So if that makes sense.
Okay, makes sense, thanks.
Okay, good question. Option 4 is shelling the work release dormitory on level 0 that I've highlighted there in yellow. This is an approximate savings of about $600,000. Again, this reduces your bed count. There's 37 beds planned for that dormitory right now. And if you took this option along with option 2, which we previously spoke about, your new revised bed count would be 506. That's what I've shown you there on that slide. if that makes sense. That make sense? Okay. Of course, you're shelling that space, just like we talked about on the third floor. You can upfit it later with it and add those beds back. So the shell of the space will be there. It would just be a project to upfit it to add the beds and bring it up to fully usable status. Okay?
Where will that go?
I'm sorry?
You eliminate, you need to work
They would have to stay in their current workhouse facility. Mhm.
current work.
The current workhouse would remain operational. Yes, sir. Or they could move to a different housing unit on one of the other floors. I mean, that's an option too. Yes, sir.
I will say something, though, that RK had told us, if we keep that same building that we're using now, the new part won't certify because of housing prisoners in that part.
My understanding is that building is currently not certified or
Can't be.
can't be recertified or something of that nature. I don't remember the details right off the bat.
Let me ask,
That could be a problem, sir.
see, do we have our law enforcement people? Oh, they're back here behind me. If we just shell that workhouse in, would that create a morale problem among the prisoners? Say the others have a nice facility and we're gonna have to be over here in the,
Well, I think your biggest thing is just what Tim said, is being certified in. And from what I understand, once you start building, you gotta get your whole facility to use certified. Is that not right, Tim? And I think Bobby come over our rules, Bobby, and it was unreal what worked, and maybe Tim was gonna have to be done there. Is that not correct?
Yeah. His
A lot
comment
of
was,
money.
his comment was to bulldoze it and
Yes.
start over.
okay,
It's in bad shape.
thank you.
So if we do that, or if we just kind of remodel it, but you're gonna be right back up to your 600,000, correct?
Yeah, it's got a lot of infrastructure needs over there. I got one question. On the cutting cost, if we eliminate the courts, it's 10,000, 10.9, okay. It was my understanding, and this goes back some ways, and my mind may be muddled, but I was thinking it was about 18 million to build the Justice Center. Did anybody else, or did I misremember that?
No,
Do
I
you- do
remember.
You remember that?
Yeah, I remember some numbers like that. On
Okay,
square
18 or
footage.
19 million to build it, and to not build it, we're only gonna save 1.9. I mean,
Or 10.9.
I meant 10.9, sorry.
These numbers, what we used was a conservative square footage number based on these bids that we received. We could see additional savings there. We could have been too conservative in the square footage number we were using. So that could.
Well, it just doesn't add up. I mean, that's $8-9 million that were difference there to build it than it is to not build it.
There could be some discrepancies in the numbers. So until, if we cut it out, the only way you're gonna know a true number is to rebid the project. That's the only way you're gonna know a hard number.
Sure, I understand that bill, but $9 million, $8 million is a lot of variance there.
Hopefully, we could get closer to that.
I would hope so.
I would hope so too.
One thing about it, if you eliminate the courtrooms in a new facility, you're still gonna have to spend some money to renovate our current courtrooms.
At some point.
And some way to attach the two buildings together to transport them.
You're gonna have to either physically move them in a physical connection somehow, or you could transport them by vehicle from one building to the other. I mean, those are the two options.
And that'd be a logistical nightmare because it'd be expensive.
There'll be an impact there. No
That was the exact words the sheriff used, said it would be a logistical nightmare to move them from building to building.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, ideally, you
I
want
asked
the
him
courts
that.
in the same building. I mean, that's how the design came about to begin with. But again, this is trying to cut square footage in order to bring the numbers closer to where it needs to be.
Because we're in a fiscal nightmare right now, so logistics or money.
That's for y'all to say. So I'll move to option 5. Option 5 that we've outlined there is actually moving the cost of some of the loose kitchen equipment from the cost of the project over to vendor supplied. So county contracts for kitchen services with a vendor, putting the cost of that equipment on that contract rather than in the construction contract. We estimate that's approximately $350,000 savings.
Is that still an option, Bill?
That was taken off the table.
What about, oh, okay, if it's still an option, that's better to get it new, and that's our, some of the equipment, what about some of the equipment that's there in the old kitchen? It's not very old. Okay,
Some of it has been planned. Yes.
thank you.
So the next page was basically a summary of these options. And I kind of outlined there for you using that low bid from Branch Build, that 87.8 million. And again, that is 621 beds, just for clarity there. And then I've outlined adding up those options that would reduce the project. So your potential savings from all 5 of those options is about 16 million there. And then that puts your construction costs at about 72 million. But again, as we've already spoken, that is no courts, and that reduces your bed count down to 506. So I'm hoping I clarified that there for it.
I've got a couple quick questions for you. Shelling the 3rd floor, doing that, are you still building the maintenance ways and putting the water system in? You're doing everything to it except putting the beds in, or?
You're running the hard piping up to a point and you're capping it, so that
Yes.
when that housing unit is upfit, you have a place to connect your plumbing line, for instance, or
Yes.
your mechanical duct work. You have a place to connect into and route it to the cells or to the ceiling or whatever is you're doing to upfit that space, if that makes sense.
But all of that will be built,
The point from your unit to that capping point would be in that housing pod, and then when you upfit it, you would find that
Oh, yes.
place in the unit to branch
but
it out.
I'm talking about the maintenance way,
Yes.
all the way around.
Yes.
So all that would be done. What would be the cost savings of just not building the 3rd floor at all?
Well, we studied that, but then we ditched it because we wanted to try to maximize the beds. And the issue that we saw with just ditching the 3rd floor altogether is that would put you in the future having to build another building to add those beds.
Why couldn't we build the building and build the 2nd floor to where it could be added to?
The concern that we have, and someone else might be able to speak to a little bit better than myself, but seismic codes are always changing. And our concern is if you leave the structure there for levels, for that 3rd floor level, for instance, to be planned to be built in the future, what happens in the future if your seismic codes have changed and then the building structure is not adequate to support that in the future. Also, the other thing you got to think about is then you're adding on an upper floor to an operational facility. So you're potentially impacting some operations of that facility. So it's going to be somewhat of a logistical concern and probably cost at that point too. It's going to be.
But it's going to be
higher
cost either way. But
Yeah.
with the seismic codes changing and everything, couldn't we hit that same thing with adding the weight of the pods into the shell that we've built? Say it's 10 years down the road.
No, that's already sized for the weight of those pods currently, and that wouldn't be affected.
Wouldn't be affected when we go in to get the permits to put those cells in?
Shouldn't be.
Also, we were going to put females on the 3rd floor.
They weigh less.
The equipment to house them doesn't weigh any less. When you add
No,
that
I'm-
equipment in, the weight is going to be.
I'm just saying,
Yes.
from a housing standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, 2 of the pods are dormitories, so it's just furniture.
Brian, just to kind of.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
When we looked at, that was kind of one of the first things we did was say, what if we cut the top floor off? To try to get the amount of money we need to get out of it. We looked at, whether we needed to put courts and the top four off or a hybrid of that. Leave some of the courts, take some of the beds off. How many beds do we have on that upper floor that would disappear if we chop?
196 is the total bed plan for.
Yeah, that would cut it below 500 as one. So our concern would be you full thing. And then you're looking at a horizontal expansion, which we've got master plan, but you'd have to demolish the Justice Center in order to build that, that expansion. Unless you were, that's why we went with the shell option to try to find a way to do that. It would make it upfit down the road a lot easier. And we would master plan the top floor where you would bring materials on the outside, the scaffolding into the red yard part. It would be a demountable piece that could then be built back up after construction was done. So we wouldn't have to be bringing everything through an operational facility internally. We would have to design it where we could, add it up, infill it upstairs for those future.
It's already designed with that in mind because we had taken the option, listed alternates to not upfit those in the bid. So it was already planned and designed that way.
Thank you.
I've got a question. On option one, where it says eliminate all the courtrooms, could we not just do half the courtrooms that we've been in the plan instead of all the courtrooms being gone?
But like Dan was just saying, we looked at that, and we felt like it just wasn't, there was just not enough savings there, to do that. So, I mean, yeah, 8 million is what we thought, was the potential savings there, so.
These costs are estimated on our bid per square foot. And the one that concerned me the most, I think, not that I want them necessarily to have a rec yard, but the operational cost involved and the safety involved if we do away with those rec yards. There's no other option to build maybe 2 of them and, add maybe not one to every floor. I'm just...
I mean, yeah, you could add rec yards to each.
I mean, that could increase staffing just in that alone.
Yeah, and logistically, what you're gonna do when you start increasing, or doing what they're saying there, is you're gonna take more people to do other things, and your prices are gonna jump on the other side of the building. I mean, I'd love to say the $10.9 million, but let me ask you a question. 5 years down the road, is that courtroom gonna cost us 15 million, 20 million? Hard to bid, yeah. And so, for the saving, I just think we're shooting ourselves in the foot. I do not want to eliminate 78 beds, 37 beds, and none of that stuff. It just don't make no sense to me.
No, when we first started, they wanted 900 beds.
I know that, you're right.
And we finally cut it down to
Six
something, and
And for the millions of dollars, also we're cutting down beds. What are we doing this for? We're doing it for the beds, and it's going to hurt us. And when you start doing all this, reduce the single rec yards, it's going to take more people to transport them. All that, it's money, and it's big money. May not be at one day, but every day, in and out, it's big money.
One thing to look at, if the capital investment's one thing, but then the staffing, of course, is reoccurring costs.
Exactly. And you can't find enough people right now to run the jail. How are you going to find these people to do all this other stuff? Hello?
Mr. Payne, there's one other question I had. Is there, this may be a wrong question, but is there any engineering available, like in foundation work? Is there any cost cutting that you guys can then help us with,
I believe there is, Mr. Cutshaw. That's hard to quantify in a presentation like this.
Yes.
But my goal is to look at some of that and see what we can cut out as value engineering through this. If the commission elects not to move forward and redesign, that would be one of our goals, is to see what other efficiencies we can do to help cut costs on the project.
Thank you.
If you eliminate the court system, are you going to eliminate the county court clerk's offices?
Yes, sir. That's part of that 31,000 square foot.
I just looking for it was in yellow. I didn't see that.
Yeah, that portion in yellow is, it's all of the courtrooms, it's all the ancillary spaces that are associated with courtrooms, like judges' offices, jury deliberation space, the community services area, and the clerk of courts is in that area.
Could you put that one back up
Option one, I believe it is.
where it shows the court? Look right down from the yellow. Is that the county court clerk's office right there in front?
The portion in white there?
Yeah.
So I'll clarify that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. This portion in white here,
Yes.
Commissioner Naismith, that is the jail administrative areas. That's the jail administrative areas. That's the video visitation space, staff locker rooms, those type of areas, administrative, that is needed to operate the jail.
Public restrooms.
There will be some public restrooms there as well. Currently, now we could take a look at this. Currently, we left the lobby size the way it was in the design with the anticipation of the future courtrooms being added. We didn't try to reduce square footage there or anything, but that's certainly something we could take a look at if that's something.
Isn't Teresa West complaining about they need more space now?
County court clerk.
County
I
Court
didn't
Clerk's
hear your
office?
question. Is your mic on?
I'm sorry.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'm just not, probably not talking into it though. Isn't the county court clerk jammed now? Aren't they asking for more space?
There's two locations.
Right.
They're here and
Right.
over there, it's consolidated.
Mhm.
But, she would like, she would first like consolidation.
Sure.
But she's got her folks really over the Justice Center, two locations, the big room and then the criminal court back at the end of the hallway, and then their office here.
Right.
She could use, storage is usually her.
Number one.
I still don't see where her offices are.
So if you recall, this bar of area right here is the clerk of court
Oh,
area.
okay, in front of the
Yeah.
courtroom.
Same question.
Okay.
These are the courtrooms here. This area back in here is the judge's office, jury deliberation space, all those ancillary type spaces.
Okay, I see it now.
Is there, just looking at the rendering, beautiful building. But is there some work we could do on the facade of the building? I mean, I hate to do that because it looks really great, but,
You could, that's certainly an option.
I mean, that's pretty expensive to do this.
I think the point of this exercise was to see what we could quickly pull out of the building without a lot of redesign. That way we could quickly turn it around and get it back on the street. Now, if we wanted to take it a little bit longer and study some of those type things, we certainly could do that. That's certainly an option. But I think our thinking was the quicker you can get this thing back on the street with the reduced.
I understand,
reduced square
but
footage.
there's a lot of money on the outside of the building that we could probably simplify or simply eliminate to cut costs. I think we look at those options also.
We could do that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one item in particular we discussed, was right now we've got precast wall panels with thin brick. And we were thinking that maybe just take it to what they call an architectural precast panel, which is an aesthetic looking, it's got integral color, we can vary the color on it, but it's just a precast. In other words, rather than put the thin brick in the precast, we'll just go precast. So it really doesn't change how we've got it detailed, how we've got our footings designed. It just lowers the cost, so you don't have that brick look, maybe we give it a brick color. You know, it's still got the same general color scheme, maybe a couple of highlights in it, and we think that may result in the savings. That'd be fairly quick for us to do and turn it back on. So I think that's a great point that you mentioned about looking at that, because we would certainly do that. We've also, I think Tony's been in touch with 4 bidders to try to pick their brains on what they think might be some potential savings that they saw and their subs saw. It just takes a little while. We just got bids a week ago, so we're trying to do a scramble as fast as we can so we can offer you up some suggestions. But they've been solicited, and I think Tony will hopefully hear from them. Hopefully they'll have some good ideas that we can implement.
How long do we have, how long would that be before maybe we could get some of those ideas of cost?
Well, the longer you work on it, the better ideas you get. So we've got to get those bidders, and I just told you, the $40,000 to get the job, we're fixing to reject the bid, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, so I have to, their feelings are hurt.
Sure.
You got the high bidder, and the second bidder, which could be Wayne, or it could be Branch, depending on which one, are willing to help a whole lot. So I've got meetings set up with them next week to get those ideas. Plus, I thought I would circle back around to some of the known subcontractors who've been with them, listen to those guys. We've got, we talked about foundation a while ago, we've got ideas being thrown out there where it's $1 million, I expect on that, changing casing sizes on the files. It just takes time and it takes a lot of effort to get that weaned out of the job. But I've started developing a DE list, and we want to take the low-hanging fruit first, the easy stuff, like maybe the inset brick and the precast, and change the architecture. There's two companies that bid that, Vermont and each helped me budget it back in November. We might get it. But anyway, I've been told that a couple of contractors, general contractors, were surprised how expensive that line item was. So it takes effort to get with them, contact them, work through what they felt was expensive, and what makes it more economical, while still remain attractive. General contractor just throw you up a concrete wall.
I'm just curious of a timeline, though, that maybe,
It's a 3-week effort.
I mean, I think it'd be worth that effort.
Brian, some of us have questions for your jail consultant. I'm sorry, we've forgotten your name. Would you please come up to the podium?
You gonna start?
Tell us,
Todd Davis.
Todd,
I'm
okay.
surprised you forgot me as many years as I've been coming here.
And I'm sorry about that, but,
Who I am sometimes too. So
okay. We've heard a lot of concern about safety issues of this 3-level facility. And I know you've addressed that in the past. My concern is that you guys and all of us have involved TCI in this process. And I find it very difficult that they would put their stamp of approval on this facility if there were safety concerns. And then also, we've had the fire marshal who's put, his stamp of approval on it. And I find it difficult that they would approve it if there were safety concerns. Now, you've been involved in building multi-story jails, so I want to know your take on it once again.
the big misconception about being multi-story is that an inmate can jump from one floor to the other. Impossible for that to happen. Each floor operates independently, whether it's stacked on top of another one or if it's beside it. It's literally impossible to jump down from one floor to another. I mean, it'd be like stacking this courtroom on top of another courtroom. I mean, it's not able to happen. In these housing units, you've got a floor, you've got housing units, cells, you've got a mezzanine level, which is stairs. Sometimes inmates can get over that railing inside of that single floor. That's why we've got them broken into different types of classification. So you classify those inmates per those floors. Is it impossible for them to jump over that railing inside of that single floor? No, it's not impossible. But that's why you classify them based on their security level. But to think that they could jump from one floor to another is not physically possible. You can't, the only way you're going to get from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor is either down a flight of stairs or an elevator. They can't get outside of their housing unit to do that.
Most of this, the materials that's going to be used in construction of this facility is basically steel and concrete.
Yes, sir.
What in the facility would be combustible?
With all my years of running a facility, things that say that they're fireproof, they may not flame, but if they're able to set them on fire, sometimes they may smolder or give off gas. I mean, it's like that in any type of construction. What you don't see in jail construction is a lot of wood and combustible materials. You don't see drywall, you don't see plywood. That's just not a material commonly used in correctional and detention facilities.
And we have a sprinkler system, don't we?
Have to by code.
I know, and it would put out a fire pretty quick, wouldn't it?
And a smoke control system. Yeah, and a smoke control system,
Yeah.
exactly.
And a smoke,
Also, flood
Okay.
control. We've discussed our flood.
With the maintenance during the design for a water management system that allows for that not to happen.
So is it,
Add to what Todd's saying, if I could. We've been talking a lot of times about whether a single level is safer than a multi-story. I heard that mentioned by the public, and I appreciate their interest in having a safe jail. Well, I can tell you that Todd and I wouldn't be associated with any facility that wasn't safe by anybody's standards, national accreditation standards. And of course, TCI with Jim Hart and Bob Bass have been actively involved. We like to consider this one of the safest facilities that the state's ever built. And we feel like that it is. I think one of the things that the advantage of a multi-story jail facility like we have at this size, if we were building a 200-bed jail, we would recommend exactly that it be a single level. But this one being about 600 beds makes it what we call a large jail facility. And one of the biggest staff and one of the biggest risks is the time spent moving an inmate from point A to point B. Right now, the advantage of having the multi-story design that we have is they come in on the ground level, kind of in a basement level, where the intake is. They don't have to travel very far out of the intake, and they hit an inmate elevator that's got cameras in it. It's controlled remotely. The officer that's escorting doesn't have keys, doesn't have the ability to control. It's all controlled remotely. And they go straight up to their housing floor, and then boom, they're right in there with 6 different housing units with a very short corridor to get in there. And then the other ones go up another floor, so they're completely isolated from the floor below. If this was all laid out horizontally, they'd have to leave the intake booking area and walk down this, escorted now, walk down this long corridor. If I was at the far end of the building, I've got almost 2 or 3 football fields of corridor that you've had to pay for with construction dollars. I have to air condition, I have to have smoke control in it, I've got to have sprinklers in it, and go all the way down this thing back and forth. If I got medical, they got to come all the way back, and they're walking by all these other housing units. You see, and I think I think it's actually safer because I have less horizontal inmate movement with the design we have. I wanted to make that, remind you of that. I think we've spoken about that earlier, but we feel like that makes it even safer.
I've got another question, and it's probably a stupid question because I'm having trouble processing something. I understand that our current sheriff wants a wagon wheel. And when I envision a wagon wheel, I completely circle and a center where somebody watches, in this case, over 600 people. It's not a complete wagon wheel, is it? It's a half wagon wheel, like what we have in this facility.
That's exactly right. This is a radial concept. I call it, architects like to call it fancy, wagon wheel,
Yeah.
We like to call it something fancier. It's radial. So what it allows us to do is just like an airport control tower. We have an elevated control tower that looks into one of 6 units on a per floor basis. But there's only so many units you can look into and have it even be remotely effective. We feel like having 6 is about as many as you'd ever want to be able to observe. And Todd, having run a jail, knows that better than I do. So that's what you have is a series of 3 radial housing units with 3 control rooms that look into six, each one of them looks into 6 housing units.
I know Coffee County has been mentioned.
That's radio.
It's radial.
Yes, sir.
We
Same-
were
same
there,
concept.
we only saw one, they didn't show us the ladies' section. And they're gonna build another, or will wanna build another section that will have to be radial, you know, okay, all right. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Mr. Davis, back to one thing on staffing, the multi-level compared to the single level. Now, when Jim Hart was here, I was under the assumption that our staffing would not change much, wouldn't be much different between a multi-level and a single level because it depended more upon inmate population. There's always that administrative part of the staff that will be no matter how many inmates you have. But is that correct? It matters not whether it's 4 acres long.
If we were to take this building, this proposed building apart,
Yes, sir.
and put it side by side, you would literally have the green mile of corridors for staffing. So you would end up, rather than staffing each floor, you would staff each section. So, I mean, the staff savings would be insignificant, if any. What Teresa and her administration would do, as shifts come in, you're assigned to the first floor, you're assigned to the second floor, you're assigned to the third floor. Well, if it's in a one level, you got people running everywhere on that single level, not to mention the support services. Transporting food from the kitchen to that far unit 3 football fields down to the left, as opposed to being able to take it straight out of the kitchen onto an elevator and up. So it's staffing, picking up staffing by doing it all on one level. Now, if you were a 200 bed or less facility, very possible. But a facility this size, I think it's insignificant.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I can mention one more thing about life safety. Again, that is very important. You know, in addition to being fully sprinkled, and in addition to having an engineered smoke control system, there's also a requirement of code of the requirement for multiple smoke compartmentalization of the building. So what that means is, let's say there's a fire that does break out. They find the mattress and are able to get some contraband in or light or something, light up a mattress. Well, what that does is the fire alarm enunciator panel will go off and the master control knows exactly where that fire is, what unit. The idea is he would take those inmates and evacuate that unit within the secure perimeter to a separate smoke compartment. It's 1 hour fire separator. Now you have on each floor of the 3-floor level housing, each one of them has multiple smoke compartments as part of that floor. So you don't have to take them to a different floor level. You can take them within the same floor level and move them into one of the housing units that's on the lower side of the smoke control compartment, if you know what I'm talking about. That way, you can contain them in the secure perimeter. You're not just releasing the inmates out into the street. You're basically holding and keeping them safe in place within the secure perimeter until a fire situation can be dealt with where it broke out. So I want to mention that too. So it's extremely safe. Plus, the construction type is built like a bunker anyway because of the security level. So it's probably going to be actually the safest building in the county when you're all said and done in case of a tornado or something. It's highly, highly safe.
Any more questions? Seeing none, at this time, I would like to entertain a motion to reject the bids. And let's move forward with our options, see what options we have, and move forward.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
A motion and a second. Want to call the roll?
Eileen Ardeline,
I'm voting for the motion.
Yes.
Be a yes then, yes.
Chris Cutshaw,
Aye.
Randy DeBoard,
Yes.
Thomas Doty,
Yes.
Tim Goins,
Aye.
Bobby Hahn,
Aye.
Tim Horner,
Yes.
Joe Huntsman,
Yes.
Wayne Neesmith,
Yes.
Mike Reed,
Yes.
Howard Shipley,
Yes.
Jim Stepp,
Yes.
Taylor Ward? 13 yes.
Motion passes.
Ask them to bring us another recommendation in
Items
3 weeks.
of interest, there is none, and I would like to say,
Make a motion to ask them to bring us another recommendation.
So what we'll do is the Mosley team and Tony Pettit and myself, we'll continue the process that we've started with these options, and Tony working with the contractors and getting the value engineering listing, and I'll be working on the finance side of it and seeing what the federal government comes with, what we can and cannot do with federal money. But we'll continue work if that's what the commission wants. We'll continue down that path and come back once we have
Would it,
answers.
Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate for us to maybe eliminate an option? I'd like to move that we eliminate option 4. That's the one that deals with the workhouse, because if we're gonna have to spend a whole lot of money on the Clerk facility, it could, as something close to this, is just eliminate that option now. So I move that we do so.
I'll second that motion.
600,000.
Question, how much money you talking, Howard?
We're talking, here, the 600,000.
600,000.
Estimation of 600.
Don't you think you could go over and renovate the existing we got for a lot less than 600,000?
Probably not.
no,
For 37 people?
Well, Wayne, don't forget one item. Well, don't forget one item. If we go to the old facility, it won't certify. That's the issue with revamping the current workhouse, is that it will not certify once we move into our new.
Eliminate it altogether.
Well, if you know right now they're not gonna certify it, it's not even worth bringing up, renovating it. No. Is it?
Well, we're not renovating the old one.
That's what I say.
Okay.
If you know,
I thought
if you
that's
know
what you
the
were
state's not
advocating.
gonna certify it, I think the reason the state didn't certify it before was because I think the plumbing was bad, the roof was bad. You've had a lot of work to do on it. But
Well, we need a
600,000
whole
is a lot of
new
work.
roof,
You
wouldn't
can
it?
get a lot of work for
Fire.
$600,000.
There was also a fire issue, was there not?
Well, I think you misunderstood. His motion was to continue with the current new jail with the workhouse facility within the new facility. That's what Howard's
Yeah.
motion
So we'll
was.
eliminate it altogether.
Yeah, we're not talking about renovating the old one.
You're not eliminating it.
No, this is eliminating the option 4.
So you still want to put them down in the basement, right?
Still want to put them down there.
so we had a motion and we had a second? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Seems there is none, so option 4 will be eliminated.
I've got another question, Mr. Chairman.
30, but
Do we need to meet Monday evening?
$600,000.
That's
It's
what I
not
thought.
Monday, it's Thursday, the 26th.
Oh, you haven't issued it?
Think you just
Oh,
bulldoze it
okay,
down and start
that
over.
answers that then. It's just on my calendar. I like to erase it off.
Anything else to be brought? Gentlemen, thank you, your time, your hard work, and we're adjourned.